I think it's even absurd, the notion that there is like a guy at the top who has all the answers. That's at least not the way I view myself, and I have even trouble viewing myself as a leader. I more think of myself as the guy in our team who is trying to stay one step ahead and thinking a little bit more about the future. And then I see my job as communicating that vision, or not only communicating, it's also often negotiating that vision with the team, and then stepping the hell out of the way.
Hi, my name is Salla Ibrahim and I'm your host in this podcast called Mind is Your Own Business. In this podcast, we share stories that are usually left untold. We shed light to the struggles and learnings of successful people who have used Laavu psychological coaching. We hope that by this we could validate the fact that each and every one of us have our own struggles and also give you insights how to cope with your own mind. Today, as a guest, I have the great Juhana Rintala, CEO and co-founder of Ruokaboksi, a steaming hot startup in Finland. Welcome, Juhana.
Thank you.
My first question is, if you couldn't use any professional titles, how would you introduce yourself?
Yeah, I would introduce myself as a father of two beautiful kids and a husband. Yeah, father and husband. I think those are the biggest roles before actually being a CEO.
So first father and husband, and then being a CEO and entrepreneur.
Yeah, for sure. Actually, like in Sweden, something I noticed when we moved back from Sweden 5 years ago was that in Sweden it was very normal for, like in business events, for speakers to start with their family. Like, hi, I'm Juhana and I have 2 kids and we live here and here, and then kind of go into the role or the presentation of the business side of it.
Yeah.
In Finland, we don't do that a lot.
It's always the professional
Yeah.
titles. Yeah, but I think it's an interesting question. Yeah, father and husband, but what if you wouldn't have a family and it would be like you need to identify yourselves from something else than from your work identity?
Yeah, it's difficult.
Yeah,
I mean, it's such a big part, for sure.
Of course.
At least at this stage, with small kids, it's like work and family.
Yeah. There's no room for
no,
other
and then
other
the
roles.
rest is like maintenance to be able to do that.
Exactly. Cool. But we're talking today about leading in uncertainty. On a scale of 1 to 10, how much uncertainty is there currently in your life?
Well, at the moment, I think it's a atypical time, at least in the context of the last 5 years, because right at this moment, actually, there is not a lot of uncertainty in my life. Like in the business, we've reached a very stable situation, and we're kind of preparing for probably a lot more uncertainty, but right now there's not a lot from the business side, and from the personal side as well. I think everything is surprisingly stable. So I've been enjoying that feeling now for maybe the last 6 months, and I'm sensing the need to shake things up a little bit.
So there's a kind of need for some uncertainty or some.
Yes, for sure. There's a huge need for chaos. but yeah, I think like trying to enjoy this now and being conscious of the fact that it's not gonna last, and it shouldn't last. I don't think so. I think there needs to be a bit of chaos and uncertainty to make life interesting.
And if I understood right, there has been a chaos in your life. Like if you look back in 6 months or 1 year, it was quite different.
Yeah. No, for sure. I mean, the last, like I said, it's a very atypical time right now. And it's like the last 5 years have been a lot more uncertainty than what I'm having right now.
So what has been the biggest uncertainty or a period of time of uncertainty in your life?
Well, to be honest, I think like the biggest, like objectively looking, the biggest uncertainty that I have introduced into my life or our life was when we decided to move from Sweden and found Ruokaboksi.
And that was how many years
so
ago?
That was 5 years ago.
ago.
And we were like, we've been living in Stockholm for 4 years, and I had a good job, and my wife had a nice job as well. We had one kid, 2 kids actually. So Anton was just born, and then we just decided, due to many factors, that now was the time to move back to Helsinki, and then there was the opportunity to found Ruokaboksi. Kind of those two things were mixed together. But what that meant was, of course, to trade down a lot in like salaries, and that was very scary, at least for us with 2 small kids and very uncertain future. My wife was staying at home, and I was trying to get Ruokaboksi off the ground. But that was also definitely one of the absolutely biggest learnings of my life, was to notice that it doesn't matter. Even though we like salary wise probably went down to, as a family, to a third or a quarter of what we had in Sweden, to notice that it doesn't matter. You adjust to that, and maybe we didn't eat in restaurants as often, and maybe we didn't travel as much, but so what, it really doesn't matter. And that's been very empowering for me to kind
so
of
not
know
about the money.
to know that I'm not like in especially in corporations, you like tend to, and the system is built in such a way that you're always like going for the next raise or next position, and to jump out of that and to be on my own, and to even though the salary level was much lower, to see that it's all right. I can manage. It's been extremely empowering.
I can imagine. So how did you cope with that uncertainty at that time?
Well, I think in the beginning it was kind of easy, because it was kind of obviously we'd thought about it, and we were just like following through a decision that we had made. So it wasn't really uncertainty in like a practical sense on a day-to-day basis, and it wasn't as like straining mentally, for example, in the beginning. But then later on, I think it just like, and the start was tough. Everything didn't like blow up from the beginning in the way we had hoped. I think that was like the toughest time. That's when I really felt that I don't have a plan. In the beginning I had a plan, but then when the plan doesn't really pan out exactly like you thought, and then you kind of need to figure something new out, and that's when it was most stressful. But my way of coping, I think I'm a man of routines, and I've found a way to live my life with doing certain activities, like, and it's very simple, taking care of my physical health and eating well, sleeping enough, and then now also lately also much more thinking about my mental health, and having kind of a similar attitude to mental health as physical health. Someone said that if it's widely understood that it's good to move physically or do physical exercise 3 or 4 times a week, whatever. So why don't we have the same attitude to mental health? And I just found that I didn't have a good answer to that question. So I think those things, like just and doing those routinely, not expecting results too quickly, but just keeping at it. That's been a way for me to kind of survive, and I think also even thrive now in a much more chaotic environment with much more uncertainty than what I previously would have been able to handle.
Yeah, I think we as a human beings, we need to have, or the more chaos we have around us, the more important it is to have the daily routines and kind of the things that you can affect, you can have an effect on being quite like manageable and in control. So that's how we kind of manage our mind as well.
No, for sure. And that's something I hadn't realized before. It's like I've never consciously thought about what do I need to, even to perform well at work, what do I need to do outside of work in order to do that? I've never been so particular about it as I am now, and now I really think it all needs to like be handled in a good way.
So when you talk about leading yourself mentally or the mental health, what do you mean in practice?
Well, I think like leading myself is. I believe in these kind of processes, like I was talking about, and what I mean by processes is like following some kind of diet. And when I say diet, I just had lunch at McDonald's, so I don't mean like some kind of fancy diet, but just like thinking about what kind of food makes you feel good and is good for your body. That's a process for me, and then exercising in a certain way, what makes you happy, and sleeping according to at least some scheme, and spending time, of course, with loved ones and family, also very important. So I think that's like the key, that's the basic, and it's so simple. I think often when we talk about leading ourselves, it's like what I at least think about is some kind of productivity apps or those kinds
Manage
of
your
things.
calendar.
Exactly, and for me, I don't use anything like that. I think it's much more basic. You need to have the basics in place in order to be productive. You can't have an app help you with productivity in the long run.
And I think it's also about listening to yourself. Like,
For sure.
It's good to have an app, but if you don't listen to yourself and listen to your own needs, what do I need now? What kind of diet? Do I need sleep? Do I need exercise?
Exactly.
Then it doesn't really matter what the app says.
No, for sure. And hours of work, it's like when to work. 8 to 4 is okay for someone. Some other person wants to work from 8 to 12 and then take a 3-hour break, and then it's very individual. I think those are the important things when it comes to leading ourselves and productivity, not the kind of the fancy tools that are often pitched.
Definitely. So in work life, and maybe especially as a leader, we are conditioned to come up with the answer, like a correct answer to questions and situations, and like our brains are hardwired to see uncertainty as a risk or threat. But and it's psychologically very normal to feel stressed when we are in unfamiliar situations. But how do you embrace the discomfort of not knowing, because we can't always know everything?
Yeah, I mean, do you mean when leading others, or
for example?
Yeah. Well, I think it's a very natural state, and I think it's even absurd, the notion that there is like a guy at the top who has all the answers. That's at least not the way I view myself, and I have even trouble viewing myself as a leader. I more think of myself as the guy in our team who is trying to stay one step ahead and thinking a little bit more about the future. And then I see my job as communicating that vision, or not only communicating, it's also often negotiating that vision with the team, and then stepping the hell out of the way, because and let the professionals do the work. I don't try to control what my team is doing, and we don't have that kind of culture at all. I believe that my job is to provide resources and to align the team where we're going, and then, like I said, step out of the way and let them do the work.
You make it sound very easy. Has it always been easy for you to kind of not being the leader who knows it all and knows where we're going and knows the answers, but rather ask the questions at least to kind of big picture?
Yeah, I was like thinking about it. Is it something I have learned, or is it something? I mean, there's definitely been. It's something that I've thought about a lot, and it comes from like the absurdity of corporate life. Like in corporate life, it's not an untypical situation that you have maybe a budget of, let's say, 10 million to do purchases or whatever for the company. But then if you want to order new pencils for yourself, you need to get approval from your boss or even your boss's boss, like a purchase of a few euros. And it's like I just think that if we treat people like children, they will behave like children. But if we treat people or employees or colleagues as adults, they will behave like adults. And that's what I've found in practice as well, that people need to know what the general direction is and what the goals are. But then the best way to get there is if they are allowed to figure out how to do it themselves.
And then they can make their own good decisions.
And that creates a lot of engagement as well.
And efficiency in the
sure.
company.
Yeah, for sure.
You're not the bottleneck in every freaking decision.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So and like I said, there was a few books I read that, and this was when I was working in Sweden at ICA, and we implemented like these agile ways of working on the technology side, like on the development side. It just struck me that how useful this way of thinking would also be on the business side that I was responsible for. And then there's a few good books like this Team of Teams. Has been quite influential. Then Reinventing Organizations is another one also, which is it's pretty extreme. Like it goes way beyond anything that even I feel comfortable with. But still, like the structure in that book is really good, and the Team of Teams book is just a really cool, inspiring story. So I definitely recommend those.
So, like when you're giving trust and giving kind of the control to your team, do you feel discomfort, or
no?
You're totally comfortable with that?
Yeah.
With that stage,
Yeah, because I mean, it's obvious that they are much better at the things than I am. I mean, if
and
we
have made good recruitments, which allows that.
So recruiting is extremely important.
Yeah.
The recruiting is extreme, and also like cultural fit. So I always said, like, and it's not for everyone. I mean, I've always said that we're not like you have like sports clubs that are like bringing up the young and then selling them off, and then you have the guys who are taking in the professionals. So and like in consulting, you probably have to be. So you recruit them very young, and then you build the people up, and you train them and so on. We have taken the other approach, that we always recruit professionals and then people who are really good at what they do, and then we allow them to do the thing. And it's just so obvious to me that it's even absurd to think that I would know better about designing recipes or doing marketing or taking care of our customers. It doesn't make any sense.
Always recruit smarter people than you are.
Yeah, for sure. And then and then if they do mistakes, which of course happens, and also sometimes I can see it that they are making a mistake, but still it's very important not to meddle. Because the biggest thing I think is to understand first that did they understand themselves that they made a mistake, and if they understand it themselves, typically you don't need to even go there and tell them that. If they know it, then they will fix it. If they are also engaged. But if they don't know it, if they did something and they don't know that it was a mistake, that is not to the benefit of the company, then you can again look in the mirror, because that's your job.
Exactly.
That's your job, to make sure that everyone knows where we are going.
What about when leading self-determination, it's super important to have the big picture clear. But what about in a situation like we have been living last 3 years in big ambiguity, like global ambiguity, because of COVID and because of energy crisis and Ukrainian war. So how do you give the visibility in a situation where everything is kind of ambiguous and you can't really know where we're going as a society?
Yeah, I think that's where agility is again a hyped word, but I think very important, because there's a lot of things that you can't control that affect your business a huge amount. And I think the key thing is the first thing is to really realize the facts, that to be honest about what is the situation now. So not to be too tied up with some plans or budget that you made earlier. But then to have a very agile organization helps a lot, because it kind of self-adjusts. It's very stressful if you think that you have to go and tell everyone how they now should work differently. But if you have independent people and smart people thinking for themselves, then it kind of self-aligns quite often, I've found.
To be kind of flexible also in the changing situations and communicating all the time. That changes. Yeah,
your own picture, how you see it now. So if my job is to think about the future and how, where we are going, and to kind of factor in the economic realities, for example, that could be a good description of what my job is then obviously to communicate that as effectively as possible, to broadcast the way my thought process is going, and then they can anticipate, if I talk about rising, high probability of inflation, then it's directly a cue to, for example, our sourcing department that okay, probably we need to think about our recipes now. How can we mitigate this? So I think that it's just if everyone has a big mandate and a clear understanding, then it makes also adjusting much easier. And we're not, of course, what helps is that we don't need to we're not reporting to anyone. Of course we have investors, but they typically, I think those discussions have been quite easy, because it's quite things that are out of our control are out of our control, and it's, just get on with it.
Exactly.
Make the best of it.
Yeah, I think it's important in uncertainty that we recognize the things where we can have effect and where we can't, and kind of not worry too much about the things we really don't have any impact
for
on,
sure.
and focus on the things.
And you can waste a lot of energy thinking or even working hard trying to impact things that you ultimately cannot control, just because you are not willing to face the fact that now the situation has changed and now we need to forget everything that we did before and think completely new how to live in this situation. It's just quite usual.
So talking about control, based on my not so scientific empiric evidence, many successful people especially balance with the need of kind of keeping things in control and versus letting go and just go with the flow. So what's your relationship with control and letting go?
Yeah, I think I don't think, and it's difficult to be completely objective on this point about oneself, but I don't consider myself having a high need to control my surroundings. But then it's a completely different story with like the routines I was talking about before. So I'm extremely.
You have allocated all the
Yeah,
need of control.
I'm like, and it's even a little bit absurd sometimes. But it like it's a huge issue to me if I can't go work out when I was planning to do so. It's like it's a really big problem for me, and I really blow it out of proportions. So that's I don't know. Maybe I'm directing my need of control into the like these core things in my life that I think are very important, and maybe that allows me to be a little bit more chill.
That could be.
Yeah, I don't know, but if you ask my wife, she will definitely think it's pretty frustrating that I have to go work out on Wednesday. So it's almost non-negotiable.
But it's also like I hear that it's important for you and it's important for your like mental health and stability and
for sure.
So.
Yeah. Working out for me is 90% mental health and 10% physical well-being.
So any like if we go back to leading people theme, so any good examples like from the past 1 year when the waters have been a bit rougher than they are now, what were your good practices in leading people when things are a bit vague and there's a lot of ambiguity?
Yeah, I think like from we've had, even though the market environment has changed a lot, is we've had a quite easy time to, or easy is maybe the wrong word, because it definitely hasn't been easy every time, but it's been pretty natural for us to adapt. But maybe when it comes to like and the reason for that is that it's kind of inbuilt in the way into our culture or the system that we have in place to be quite adaptive. But like the biggest learnings of my life when it comes to how to lead in uncertainties is exactly this system thinking and the agile ways of working. So I've had a lot of experience previously from the corporate side when you're not so agile and that can be very, very costly and extremely frustrating and very slow and unproductive, and there's nothing good coming out of that. And it's somehow like, you know, a lot of companies are still modeled after like a factory, you know. So we see people as having a certain job and then using them, thinking about them as like resources, almost like robots. You know, your job is to hammer that nail and that's it. And it's so obvious to me that that's not the way work looks like. So at least everyone at Ruokaboksi more or less has a very creative job, and then you can't like force it out of people in that factory. The factory analogy that doesn't work at all anymore, and that's why I think it's very important to think about how we organize ourselves.
So in concrete, what would be like the small step if someone is listening? Oh, now I want to build my organization like Juhana did. What would be the like concrete step that you could implement in your leading?
Yeah, I think like to be honest, the benefit I had because it's not easy, and I have a few friends who have done it and they've tried. I can give those names because I was kind of forced into it because we had. I had the experience of living through the transformation myself and not driving it, not being so much in the driver's seat at that time. So it's been kind of natural to me ever since. But there's a few books that are worthwhile reading, like Team of Teams, and reinventing organizations. I think that's a good start. There's also a Reinventing Organizations wiki that you can check out. They have like answers for any question. And then just talk to people who have done it, who have experience from what you're trying to achieve. I think that's the way I would approach it if I were to do it now.
Right. My last question, if there's someone listening to this episode and struggling with like raising the next round or making the ends meet, or if my runway is enough, what would be your advice for them in this uncertain situation?
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely relate with that for sure. But for me, the biggest thing has always been to kind of look the truth in the eyes. And I think that's often the most difficult part, because before you've done that, you're not being very helpful to yourself. And after that, everything kind of falls into place, typically. So I think that's the kind of the main thing. To be honest to yourself about what the situation really is, and then plan forward from there. And
be honest. Look the truth into the eyes.
Yes.
Yeah, that's good advice. Is there anything else you would like to add or say to our listeners?
No, thanks.
Thank you so much, Juhana. It was great to have you here.
Yes, I enjoyed it.